Hello and welcome to another episode of Tinker Time with WB7 VPC. Consider this. The following video contains shop language. If this offends you, it is best to leave now. Okay, so another morning in the shop. Everything's finished off with the cabinet except for the making of it. And it's going to go relatively quick, I've learned. So my power supply is taken apart so I can bolt it down to the base of the shelving unit. That was a really big gripe that I had with the metal shelf that I built. The power supply, my SWR meter, anything that was in there, aside from the 2-meter radio body, wasn't bolted down, or wasn't bolted down. Nothing was bolted down. So when you pushed the button on the power supply, it would shimmy back into the recesses of the cabinet and you'd have to pull it up again. If you messed with the SWR meter, it'd move to the back of the cabinet and twist around and you'd have to likewise pull it forward again. So the things that get used that don't really have the mass to hold themselves in place got screwed down or bolted down. I bored holes through the bottom of the cabinet of the power supply and the SWR meter. And then I think I used something like a number 8 1/2-inch or 3/4-inch machine screw. It doesn't have to be anything too wild and crazy. I'm not worried about anything other than just keeping things in place. So once that's done, everything's solid. Looking at it now, I've bolted in the 2-meter radio body, the power supply, the SWR meter, the antenna switch, the selector switch, and I think that's about it. The little 2-meter speaker and the 2-meter control head. The HF rig and the auto tuner are both free-flowing. They don't have any bolts holding them in, and the signal link isn't bolted into anything. I really don't use the signal link. It's more of a oddity from something I was trying to do before, so it just kind of sits over on the side by the 2-meter radio and we don't really worry about it. I had to build a new power supply line from the switching power supply back to the rig runner that's going to be eventually bolted onto the back plate of the cabinet of the shelving unit here. And that took a little bit of futzing around, but the way I had it set up in the metal cabinet, I didn't have enough room in my power lines to reach where the rig runner is now or was going to be at that time. You'll see that platform that's built up in the middle of this bottom shelf. That is where the HF rig is going to eventually sit when we get everything laid out in here. I liked having it at that angle when I just had it sitting on my desk, and I wanted to replicate that. So instead of rigging something, putting a book underneath it, something like that was temporary, I just built this little platform. I cut a couple scrap pieces of plywood, and that allowed me a place to prop my radio up. It's a much more comfortable operating position for me than how it sits flat on the desk. It's too low like that. I'm a little bit too lanky. So basically all we've got to do now is rebuild this cabinet. There's some things that are going to be put in place as we go along. The 2-meter rig mounting bracket, the same one that you would use in your vehicle, got bolted in before everything got assembled. The speaker bracket, the 2-meter head, pretty much anything that got bolted onto the shelving unit was bolted on as I was building it up. It was just easier to do it that way. Mounting the 2-meter body was kind of a pain in the butt, but I did it with the sides of the cabinet off, so I could reach in really easily with a screwdriver and make sure everything was tight. You may have noticed some rather large holes in the second shelf that we're putting on now. Essentially the lid of the lower platform. Those are to run coax down from the antenna tuner and the coax switch to the HF rig, and to run power up from the rig runner to the 2-meter radio. There's also a bunch of holes bored in the backside of the back plate that we'll eventually see here. And those are there to do the same thing. I need to get coax into the cabinet, power out of the cabinet, grounding wires out of the cabinet, all that kind of stuff. You know, there's a more of what this project was about cable management than really organizing stuff. There's just so many cables that you end up getting, and they get so ugly when they're just spraddled about. This kind of conceals everything and organizes them and makes them look nice, which is kind of hard to tell when I look at things right now because I've kind of got stuff splayed around a bit, but it's a working desk, so that tends to happen. So yeah, you can see most of the equipment that is done up now, and you can get an idea of where things are gonna end up being. I think it's relatively straightforward, if I do say so myself, but you know, let me know if there's any questions, I guess. I maybe take it for granted that I'm, you know, involved in seeing this go through. You know, I've built it, you know, been involved with it from the ground up, so to speak, so I maybe know what I inherently know what's going on, I guess. And I jumped around a little bit, and now we're all lost with where we are, so I'm gonna pretend that we're putting on the top shelf, roughly. We'll just have to drop this track in and see where it ends up. I paused to move around a little bit because things were just jumping a bit too much. And with that top shelf going in, we are just about done. Gotta put the back and the sides on, which are relatively straightforward and easy. I mean, everything was much squarer than I anticipated. I thought that I was going to have more trouble with this, but, you know, we're off a little bit, but I can live with it. I'm okay with it. It looks good as it's sitting now, and no one's going to know it's off a square or where it's off of square unless I tell them, so I'm all right with that. So now we start working on putting the 2-meter body in. And the 2-meter head plate in. All that's left is putting the sides on, and we are ready to start running cable and doing all that kind of stuff. So I think you get the general idea of what we had to do before assembly and during assembly, and then here in a minute or two, we'll kind of go through the post-mortem on the back end and take a look at how things eventually ended up. let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching, and stand by for the next video where we'll move into the shack and see everything assembled.